Welcome to another edition of Diplomatic Channel. I'm Millicent Walker, standing in for Amarati Ubani. This week, we look at the implications of the annexation of occupied territories of Ukraine by Russia, which have been widely described as sham referendums by commentators in various countries, and what happens next. My guest is a historian with expertise in comparative African history and borderland studies. He's also the founder, commissioner, International Boundaries of Nigeria's National Boundary Commission, and he's widely consulted on border and border-related matters in and outside Nigeria. Plus, the risks to global financial stability have increased across the world since April this year in the face of high inflation and low interest rates. We have an analysis of the latest semi-annual Global Financial Stability Report issued by the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and its implications. But first, a quick look on other discussions in diplomatic circles. According to the United Nations, climate change is real, as we are yet again discovering in Nigeria. The United Nations Humanitarian Coordinator for the country was speaking at a news briefing in New York on the humanitarian situation. He says that climate change factors could largely explain the flooding and the food insecurity in the country, adding that 19 million people are food insecure across Nigeria.
There are 19 million people food insecure across Nigeria. We are in particular worried about 14.7 million kids at risk of malnutrition. And amongst those are in 3 northwestern states, Katsina, Sokoto, and Zamfara, almost 500,000 children at risk of severe acute malnutrition, and around 400,000 children in the northeast. So this is an alarming crisis by any standard.
The man who led the latest coup in Burkina Faso has been named interim president until elections in July 2024. A national forum declared that Captain Ibrahim Traoré would not be allowed to stand in the polls. He seized power 2 weeks ago from Lieutenant General Paul-Henri Damiba, who staged a coup in January, accusing the authorities of failing to deal with Islamist militants. Newly appointed British Finance Minister Jeremy Hunt arrived at number 10 Downing Street on Friday, October 14. Prime Minister Liz Truss appointed Hunt to replace Kwesi Kwarteng, who had resigned at Truss's request after being forced to rush back to London overnight from IMF meetings in Washington. The International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, says it shares the frustration about the incomplete access to prisoners of war in Ukraine. This comes after President Zelensky accused the Red Cross of inaction in upholding the rights of Ukrainian prisoners of war. And the U.S. House of Representatives Committee investigating the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol voted on Thursday to subpoena Donald Trump, an action that could eventually result in the former president's imprisonment if he does not comply. Welcome back. The votes were conducted in 4 areas of Ukraine: the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic in the Russian-occupied Donetsk and Luhansk Oblasts of Ukraine, as well as the Russian-appointed military administrations of Kherson Oblast and Zaporizhzhia Oblast, captured and occupied in the first week of the 2022 invasion. But Ukraine says Russia does not fully control any of the 4 regions, where military hostilities are ongoing as its troops advance and reclaim more territories. The referendums have been called illegal under international law and have been condemned by the United Nations as violations of the United Nations Charter, with 143 countries voting in favor of a resolution that also reaffirmed the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. But let's start from the beginning. How did we get here? At Ukraine's independence, did the country have a clear recognition of its borders and its sovereignty? What is the relationship to the current situation? My guest explains. Emeritus Professor Anthony Ashiwaju, MFR, thank you for joining me on the program.
Thank you, Millicent.
What is the relationship between a country's borders and its sovereignty?
Oh, fundamental, very, very fundamental. A nation state is defined by its boundary. The basic definition of a nation state is its boundaries as recognized by the international community. Without boundaries, there is no nation state.
If you look at it in the context, okay, I was going to say that if you look at this in the context of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, is Russia denying Ukraine's right to exist as a country with its February 24 invasion?
That's right. That's right. That is the whole issue, the contestation, the military response by Ukraine to that invasion is in defense of Ukraine's territorial sovereignty. The reaction of the international community is also in support of Ukraine because Russia's invasion breached that sovereignty. It breached the boundary of Ukraine, and therefore it is a breach on international order.
But if we take this down memory lane, history, did Russia have a border problem with Ukraine after the dissolution of the Soviet Union?
Well, I am not aware of any because since the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1990, 1991, the constituent parts that became liberated went away on the basis of the boundaries that define them. And the boundaries of Ukraine were sufficiently clear and recognized by the United Nations organization. And that's why it has been admitted as a member of the UN, just as the resultant Russian Federation and the rest of them that were part of that of Soviet region, except to also say that boundaries like Ukraine boundaries with Russia, like many boundaries, like most boundaries of nation states across the world, are, as I often argue, artificial boundaries. The artificial boundaries in the sense that they seek to divide what are indivisible. In this particular case, like in many cases, the boundaries between Russia and Ukraine divided the Russian-speaking population. It divided the Russian-speaking population, particularly in the south and in the east, such that there are Russian-speaking populations in Ukraine, and it's part of the contestation by Russia in recent decades is the agitation of the Russian population in Ukraine for independence or for joining their peace and kin in Russia.
And indeed, the conflict still continues. But then you have said that some parts of Ukraine are Russian-speaking. Russia last week annexed parts of Ukraine, Donetsk, Luhansk. Does that make it legitimate?
No, not at all. As I said, the Russian population who are agitating for independence in the south and east Ukraine simply Ukrainian populations in rebellion against Ukraine. It's unacceptable.
That's the annexation of Ukrainian territory. But then when you look at the future, what do you think it has in store for these two countries at war and the rest of the world?
I believe that there is no easy way out for as long as Russia continues to invade, even to the extent of several acts that border on war crime as defined by international order, by international law. To that extent, Ukraine will continue to respond. And to that extent, the international community in NATO, the international community, European Union, the international community, United Nations Organization will continue to object to Russia's activities and support the Ukrainian state in defense of its territorial integrity. But perhaps, as I always needed and advocated in my works, the way out would be to cease fire, to cause a ceasefire, to stop the acts and go back to the drawing table of discussion, of dialogue that is aimed at reviewing the focusing on these troublesome boundaries, and international boundaries are potentially troublesome everywhere, and arrive at the more equitable, more peaceful solution that would bring to an end the perception of boundaries as barriers between states and their conversion as bridges between them, and for larger regional integration initiatives. Only this can bring about lasting peace. But for this to happen, the war must stop. The lasting ceasefire must be put in place to allow for discussion. The conversion from barrier to boundaries would, and then regional integration initiative would address the problem of those who are agitating for rebellion against the Russian population that is staging rebellion against the Ukrainian state. It will address their problem appropriately, and it will ensure the recuperation of Ukrainian territorial integrity, reestablish it, and create a new atmosphere of friendly relations between Russia and Ukraine.
And Professor, we really hope that, all of the international community, friends of both countries, can indeed broker some of these recommendations that you've given. And this is, as its impact is reaching far and wide, and even to us here in Africa. I would like to appreciate your time. Thank you, Professor Anthony Asiwaju, for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Welcome back. Aside from the global financial crisis and the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic, this is the weakest growth profile since 2001, this according to the IMF in its latest World Economic Outlook published Tuesday. The report echoes warnings from the United Nations, the World Bank, and many global CEOs that the worst is yet to come, and for many people, 2023 will feel like a recession. Andrew Nevin, Chief Economist, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Nigeria. Thank you for joining me on the program.
It's great to be here, Millicent. Thank you.
Do you agree with the warning by the IMF that for 2023, which is in less than 2 months, the worst is yet to come?
Well, I try not to make predictions, especially about the future, but I think it's fair to say that personally, my personal expectation is that, yes, the economy in the developed nations is going to continue to get worse. I mean, all the pressures that are on them in terms of inflation, the reversal of the low interest rate period for more than a decade. I mean, all of these pressures are coming to a head right now, and I don't see the situation really improving quickly. So I expect that we'll be entering recession in the UK, entering recession in the United States, perhaps some other developed nations as well.
So there are many things. Some would even say Russia's Ukraine, war, and also post-COVID pandemic. But where would you lay the biggest bottleneck?
Well, I think that from my viewpoint, the seeds of this were laid in the 2008 financial crisis. Because if we go back to the imbalances that caused that financial crisis, they were not really addressed. So central banks around the world, including the Fed, the Bank of Japan, the ECB, all had the same policy, which is this ultra loose monetary policy, negative interest rates in some cases, quantitative easing to infinity effectively. And that built up pressures in the system that were never resolved. And then they were coming to a head. And then it's been exacerbated first by COVID, which has caused all sorts of disruptions that we know. And then now, of course, by the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. So those last two elements have really accelerated the crisis. But I mean, we're not looking at any kind of rapid fix of this. And I think the people that thought, for example, that inflation was transitory are now realize that that was an error, and that we really are in for some long-term structural issues around many of the developed economies. And one of the reasons for this that's not discussed much is the population is aging. And the working age population in all these countries is actually shrinking. So from an economic viewpoint, if you're interested in GDP growth, it becomes very difficult. And COVID has really created more pressure because, I mean, I think one thing that we're not talking enough about is something called long COVID. So this is people who've had COVID, who've recovered from COVID, but really suffer from tremendous fatigue. And the numbers are staggering. Those people are often out of the workforce or working very little. So you have the aging population, you have long COVID, you have the shrinking working age population, and all of those add to the economic headwind.
What do you see happening to emerging markets and developing economies, especially where we are, sub-Saharan Africa?
Well, I think every economy is different, and to put them all together it's hard to have a blanket statement. What I've always said about Nigeria is that we can't do anything about the external economic reality around the world, but we have so many opportunities in this country. I've been here I came the first time in 2008. I've lived here for a very long time. I, of course, JAPA'd from Lagos to now based in Abuja. But we have so many opportunities in so many different, every industry effectively. So yes, it may create a little bit of additional pressure, but I don't think Nigeria or any emerging market should use this as an excuse. I mean, people that focus on developing their own human capital, their own infrastructure, their own export markets, they're going to do just fine, regardless of what happens in the rest of the world. I mean, if, for example, we exported something to the developed world, I mean, even a recession means that perhaps the economy shrinks 1 or 2%, but these are still tremendously large opportunities that can present opportunities for us. So I don't think it's any excuse, and I expect that in sub-Saharan Africa, as governance improves around the continent, as AFCFTA comes together, I think the sub-Saharan Africans do just fine. But the one difficulty I think we have to highlight that's a real issue for many countries around the world, but particularly for sub-Saharan Africa, of course, is climate change. So, I mean, we are in a climate emergency. The impact of climate change is not something that's going to happen a decade or two now. It's happening now. We see it with the flooding in Nigeria, the extensive flooding, worse than we've seen, and certainly in most people's lifetimes. And I think that we just need to find ways to deal with the climate emergency, climate resiliency in the midst of building out our economy.
I want to talk about the energy crisis, which is weighing heavily on world economies, particularly Europe, and with the geopolitical realignment of energy supplies in the wake of Russia's war against Ukraine. How will their winter look like, do you think?
No, I think it's going to be very, very difficult. But I think that the thing that Europe has learned through this is they were overly reliant on one partner, a partner who was a rogue actor in the kind of world order, world international order, and they won't go back to that. So I don't really see any accommodation with Russia. I mean, Russia has committed atrocious war crimes in the Ukraine. They've killed civilians, they've killed children, they've destroyed cities. And even if Russia came back to the table, I expect that given the resolve of the Western nations, that the direction of travel for Europe is we're not going to be reliant at all on gas supplies. So I think they'll have a very difficult year. But like all markets, these things adjust. And there's people around the world, including Nigeria and other countries in Africa, that really want to start to ramp up their gas production to be able to help Europe in its energy security situation.
Ms. PricewaterhouseCoopers, thank you for joining me.
You're very welcome, Nelson. It's been a great honor.
And finally, from spring to early autumn, due to favorable weather conditions, the pace of irregular migration attempts from the Tunisian, Libyan coast to the Italian coast accelerates, sometimes resulting in drowning. Recently, the Tunisian Red Crescent Society has said that 8 bodies of migrants, probably Tunisians, who had been missing for a fortnight, had been recovered by sailors off the coast of southeast Tunisia. DNA samples have been taken from the bodies to identify them. Well, here's more on the situation in this report.
Life is tough for asylum seekers in Italy. Most are denied refugee status, barred from legal employment, and polls suggest face discrimination. Now life for migrants looks set to get even tougher. Fresh from her election victory, Brothers of Italy leader Giorgia Meloni is expected to become Prime Minister later this month at the head of a right-wing coalition that has vowed to crack down on immigration and tighten Italy's borders. Among promised measures are accelerated repatriations and more stringent asylum rules. Italy has taken in 171,000 Ukrainians since February, more than the number of boat migrants in the past 3 years. Meloni has called the Ukrainians real refugees, telling Parliament in March that the government should take advantage of the moment and expel all illegal migrants. President of aid group Baobab Experience, Andrea Costa, feels that race is a factor in the government's decision-making. In her 2021 autobiography, Meloni said mass migration diluted ethnic identity and that Italy should favor welcoming Christians.
Postulat Sancta Mater Ecclesia.
Meanwhile, Pope Francis has made an impassioned defense of migrants, calling their exclusion scandalous, disgusting and sinful, putting him on a collision course with Italy's upcoming right-wing government.
Anzi, la soluzione dei migranti e criminali.
Francis made his off-script comments as he canonized a 19th century bishop known as the father of migrants and a 20th century Italian who immigrated to Argentina and ministered to the sick. He has made support of migrants' rights a major theme of his pontificate, presided over the sainthood ceremony attended by 30,000 people in St. Peter's Square. Elsewhere, the UN Refugee Agency says it will have to make severe cuts, increasing the hardships of those who have been driven from their homes unless it gets immediate extra funding. The war in Ukraine has propelled millions of people to flee, and there are now more than 100 million people forcibly displaced in the world, causing UNHCR's budget to balloon to over $10 billion. UN High Commissioner for Refugees Filippo Grandi says he is worried about the impact of cold weather during the Northern Hemisphere's winter on some 6.2 million people internally displaced in Ukraine.
I therefore appeal in the strongest of terms to all donors to please do more to support UNHCR and refugees around the world.
The dangers of irregular migration. We've come to the end of the program this week. If you missed any part of it, you can always play back on our YouTube channel /Channels Web. I'm Millicent Walker. I'll see you next time.